Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Sunday once again. This is MI6, the Merchandise Vault. I'm your host, The Collector, as always. And this week's episode is all about me completing and finishing Ian Fleming's second novel and my introduction to James Bond, full stop, Live and Let Die. So that means I've got notes. That means these have got to come off. So let's get stuck into it, shall we? And I can just pick out my thoughts and reflections, the notes I jotted down, and then just a kind of overview of my thoughts of the book to the movies, which is what I'd only ever known. And funnily enough, when I set that up, bearing in mind how old these VHS movies are compared to the Live and Let Die, I chose to use the same cover, pretty much, same poster rather. But with a different font, but doesn't detract from the movie itself. Fantastic, love it. Always have, always will. So now that I can actually see what I'm doing, 23 chapters, 274 pages of absolute heaven for me. Kicking in from the word go. This isn't like a cocktail, it's just a squash. It's Sunday morning after all. Or is it? Cheers. So, starting off in the book, you know, unlike the film, there's no 3 assassinations. It's just James Bond actually arriving in the United States. Obviously New York in particular. Mr. Big, he's not just an independent drug operator, it turns out. It's all about good old-fashioned gold, coins in particular. So it kind of gives me a bit of a Pirates of the Caribbean kind of feel, that it's all about treasure, gold treasure in particular, from different eras of history. And the biggest thing, that he's actually a member of SMERSH, so which is the, as I've put it, the Russian fixer organisation of the Russian government. The next thing that jumped out on me was the fact that, unlike the movie, the character of Baron Samedi, who in the movie is brilliantly played by Geoffrey Holder and remains a firm favourite for me, is actually just kind of like a figurehead as opposed to a live character. He represents a person becoming a zombie. He's kind of like a dark prince of the underworld, well, the voodoo world I should say, and he's basically feared but worshipped like a god in the same breath, if you like. And as the book progresses, there is an attempt made on Bond's life, but in the form of a snake sneaking down the back of his bathtub. It was essentially a parcel bomb instead. Personally, I liked the movie version of that assassination attempt more than the book, although I've enjoyed the book. But it's interesting how the characters are played out, because in that scene, I think it's the first time you come across Whisper, you know, the big guy with hardly a voice to speak of, but, you know, big stocky guy. But he's basically, in the book, a switchboard operator, and I kept laughing because I'd got these images in my head of this massive, imposing guy sat at like a telephone exchange, plugging in this, that, the other to each part of Mr. Big's organisation. And then again, Teehee, who's quite prominent in the film, probably almost Mr. Big's chief lieutenant, if you like, but in the book he's just a bit part player in the organisation. He's just like one of many lieutenants, if you like. and then who was obviously played by Julius Harris, who I thought, again, another bit of brilliant casting in the film. Bond and Felix Leiter's relationship obviously develops in this second novel, and what I really enjoyed was the fact that they spend time together, not just in, you know, their joint goals, if you like, but for the fact that they, you know, they go for a drink together, and instead of the filet sole restaurant chain in the films, they go to the last place on their search, which they basically spent a good part of the day going around Harlem, and they end up, I do like the name of the restaurant, the Boneyard Restaurant, and like in the film, Bond goes through the trap door, but in the book, both him and Felix Leiter go through the trap door, which I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I was wondering, is this the part where, you know, Leiter's basically tortured, fed to the shark, etc., etc. But at this point in the book, it's not. And it's also where we get the introduction to Solitaire. And the book, it's kind of put across that not only is she gifted, but she doesn't do it kind of in the form of tarot cards as such, or as emphasised, but she's more suggested that she's telepathic and being able to sense and feel what the person being questioned is giving off, whether it's truth or not. But just basically like a human lie detector. But I could see how that wouldn't work in a movie of this type. So going down that tarot card route was probably a smart move, and to be honest, I think it's a little bit more magical, not magical, a little bit more, I don't know, kind of uneasy that the cards are telling her this, that and the other, but for the book it does work. The interrogation scene, which follows on, like in the movie, Bond does actually get his finger broken, not snipped off, and it's described in great detail by the author. And then, to cut a long story short, in the book, he's eventually released, and it turns out that, you know, Leiter's okay. And it was kind of Mr. Big's one and only warning to Bond to keep his beak out of his business, which of course he's not going to. So then we have the Silver Phantom train journey from America down to the Deep South, and then obviously he catches other transport across. But there's a mystery assailant, once again, looking to take Bond out, because during that exchange, Solitaire sensed that actually Bond could help her get out of Mr. Big's clutches. So she ends up contacting Bond, and they arrange to meet up at the train station to catch this particular train, which they do. However, they plan to jump off because they know that Solitaire is going to be missed. So they jump off one or two stops before they're scheduled to. And as it turns out, the contact on the train, by the name of a guy called Baldwin, who sorted them out, kept them isolated, but, you know, not too isolated in the sense that it would be noticed on the train in case there was somebody on the train from Mr. Big's organisation. Turns out they were correct in the assumption, because when they jumped off the train, unbeknownst to them, as they continuing to make their way down to the Caribbean, that the train was stopped, and their carriage, which was also identified, was machine gunned, and that actually also killed their contact Baldwin, who had proven so useful. And to my knowledge, the character of Baldwin, whether it's a small part, big part, potentially in a future movie. As far as I know, a guy called Baldwin has not been used in the James Bond movies, so they always say go back to the books, don't they? Like I said in your first book review with these. So anyway, another character, and it's funny because they have, even though I've only completed 2 books, they have pick and chose parts out of the books and put them in different movies in different orders to the books, which when you read them, it does become a tad distracting, I've found, but not to the detriment of enjoying what I'm reading. So there's a character in Mr. Big's organisation called the Robber, and essentially he's been lifted out of the book to become Milton Crest in Licence to Kill, because he has this company called Ouroboros Worm and Bait, which I think is how you say it, Ouroboros. If I'm wrong, let me know. But it's essentially what Milton Crest's setup was in Licence to Kill, where he deals in exotic marine life, and then there's these tanks of worms or fish bait, live fish bait, but instead of being copious amounts of drugs, it's copious amounts of gold coins. So you can see why in the movie anyway they switched it from gold coins to cocaine, heroin, etc. So the worm tanks contained lots of gold coins worth, well, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And in that same breath, with it being essentially Milton Crest's setup, when Bond infiltrates the place and eventually gets the better of the robber, he ends up feeding the robber to the shark, killer for style, if you like, without the £2 million payoff. $2 million payoff. And the robber's dispatched. And at that point, the chief secret agent, no other than Strangways, appears, aka Strangways from Doctor No. This is where it gets quite complicated, or a bit confusing anyway, not necessarily complicated, because we also get a certain lovable Cayman Islander in the form of Quarrel. Not Quarrel Jr., but the original Quarrel, as in Doctor No Quarrel. And it's kind of put across in the book that Quarrel's quite an established operative, if you like, because he then goes through the process of actually coaching and training Bond for a big swim to get across to Mr. Big's island, because there's no other way for him to get there without being obviously discovered. So he was expecting quite a bit of equipment, particularly equipment that would repel barracuda and sharks, because that's the way it seems to for Mr. Big to dispose of anybody that's become a problem or has outlived their use, and it's kind of passed off as a kind of accident, that it's, they've been eaten at sea, for want of a better description. But throughout this whole section in Jamaica, it's like Quarrel and Strangways are a little bit like the MI6 team back in London. Everything's going through one or the other, and proves quite irreplaceable for Bond to complete his task. And when he takes the swim, the chapter is called Valley of the Shadows, because you are taking your life into your own hands. And the swim's about 300 yards. And something that I've enjoyed in this book in particular is the use of marine life. And I think, I've not read it yet, and I'm sure there's a chapter in it, whatever it might be, but there's some sort of squid fight that Bond ends up being in Doctor No. But in this particular case, it's an octopus. Although you don't see it fully, an octopus attack on Bond as he kind of gathers his composure until he does the final bit, which is when this attack takes place. Obviously he gets out of it, and as he kind of rests up and recovers from that octopus attack, he notices like a giant rock that's sort of underwater anyway, or it may be protruding out, I'm not too sure now, I can't remember, but definitely had come away from the cliff face, if you like, and revealed an opening, which ends up being Bloody Morgan's cave. And the way I got it pictured in my head was, it looked like, I can't remember which, it might be the original Curse of the Black Pearl, where they go in and the treasure's just everywhere. That's the kind of picture it kind of painted in my head. But from the description of it, that's where they have got their inspiration from for Dr. Kananga's lair. And it's just pretty much word for word, minus the monorail, of course. But yeah, that was definitely Dr. Kananga's lair, I should say. But there's just gold everywhere, whereas there is not in Dr. Kananga's. So Mr. Big's choice, because during all this going on when Bond had made this swim, I forgot to mention earlier that I think when, oh goodness me, Leiter and Bond went back, I think Solitaire had been kidnapped from the motel. So she was back in Mr. Big's possession. He managed to get her snatched back, and he probably knew that Bond was going to be coming anyway for her, as well as himself. But they end up capturing Bond, because when Bond goes through and into Bloody Morgan's cave, the bubbles from his tanks gave him away, and some of Mr. Big's accomplices had jumped in, pulled him out from the pool, which led into where the gold was, and restrained him, all the rest of it, chucked him in with Solitaire, chained them up, and their execution would be a joint one. And this execution was actually used in For Your Eyes Only, which was keel hauling. And what that is, for those of you unlikely to have not have seen, is where Bond and Melina Havelock are towed behind the Aris Chrysatos' yacht when they'd recovered the ATAC system, and they were being dragged along, and they basically took that from the book, and that was going on. But in the book, as this was about to happen, and as it was happening, because Bond had already placed an Olympic mine on the Secateur yacht, which was being used to smuggle all the gold from the Caribbean up to the Florida Keys and upwards to New York and beyond. Bond, in his head, not knowing whether he'd timed the fuse right of 7 hours, assuming Mr. Big would stick to his routine of being on time, of shipments being made on time and honoured. He took the risk, and if it wasn't going to work out because he'd already made that swim, he was just going to cold-bloodedly drown Solitaire. And you think, good God, but then you think what the alternative death was going to be, with the barracuda and the sharks and the being dragged over the sharp coral. Maybe he was doing her a favour. And then he would do that once he had seen the first sort of dorsal fin of a shark, or barracuda kind of, on the horizon kind of thing, that she wouldn't have to suffer that bite gruesome death. But as it turns out, the explosion happens. They manage to wrestle themselves free from the restraints, etc., and find a relatively safe spot just where that coral begins. But the death of Mr. Big compared to the inflatable pellet gun bullet from the movie, as much as I love the movie, his death in the book is far better, where he's actually although he manages to survive the boat explosion, he's injured badly because he's bleeding, and the sharks and the barracuda have picked up the smell of blood in the water. They're attacking what crewmates are left, and then they're starting to attack him as he tries to make his way towards Bond and Solitaire, who has passed out. So Bond's just holding her dead weight because of what the keel hauling had done. And eventually, I think it was a grey, not tiger shark, whatever it was a shark, took the final bite and took him under. I think that would have been a better death personally, but you're never going to get that gruesome with a Roger Moore Bond, particularly a debut one. There'd be no way the public would have accepted it or be ready for it. We saw that with Tim Dalton's License to Kill, and that was many years later than 73. So again, the interesting thing for me, second book, second villain not actually killed in some sort of physical altercation with Bond. Basically, Bond has dispatched his nemesis by using his brain, using his intellect, using his wits. And to be honest, I think that's been, for me anyway, that's been really welcome. Whether that continues with Moonraker, I don't know. I've not started reading that yet. But using his brain and his intelligence to get rid of, to dispatch Mr. Big, I thought was very, very clever. Overall view, it was nice to see that Strangways had survived, as did Quarrel. Ironically, in the movie, we all know what happens, which is a real shame. But it was great that they survived in the book. Again, there's a little bit of wit provided right in the very final chapter where Bond checks in with them and he says, well done, all the rest of it, blah, 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 blah. And he says, in the transmission, because it wasn't verbal, it's like some sort of communique, that he was granted 2 weeks passionate leave. And in the book, he says, I'm sure he meant 2 weeks compassionate leave, and it was making me smile. But again, overall, Live and Let Die. 23 chapters, 274 pages. A brilliant read. Again, each of these books that I was lucky enough to be bought, £9.99. As you can see, let's pop that there, look, nice and close. So can't say enough about getting these books. They are well worth it. Whether it's this version or another version, you take your pick. But overall, Live and Let Die, I thoroughly enjoyed. Out of the two books, which one did I enjoy more? Hard to say. Because like I've said, the movies that riddled within me up here, they're two of my favourite movies, so impossible to say. But what I would say, because they're so different from the films, even though it's a bit of a mishmash of characters from the films and then the books, and how people are dispatched, what's in the books as compared to what's in the movies, and vice versa, and what's not. The books are great entertainment. I'm only 2 in. I'm so glad that I am only 2 in because of the no horizon yet of something developing in terms of a movie or further movie news. Hopefully that's going to change very, very shortly, as I keep saying. But yeah, looking forward to reading Moonraker. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like, a follow, a share, a comment, question, subscription, word of mouth. I appreciate it. I truly do. And I will look forward to seeing you next weekend. Au revoir. Oh my goodness me! I was right in front of the screen as well. See you next week, ladies. See you next week, ladies and gents. You can tell it's Sunday morning, can't you? All the best. Bye bye now.